Apologies. Okay, so feedback from your breakout rooms. Yeah, Man.
We spoke a little bit about kind of power dynamics in terms of, for example, names, and how we might address power in that way.
Mm-hmm.
We spoke about young people and seeing children as Cheryl kind of was talking about seeing children as autonomous beings, and how that can also play into the room. And also with kind of like short-term models, there's something about feeling the need to guide the sessions or be solution focused, or different modalities coming into play that feel like, oh, I as the therapist have to do something.
Yes.
And I guess the comment of like competence within that. And also feeling, I guess, as a supervisor within that, the need to, like, when we were talking about names and mispronouncing things, like I've also had a history of like getting my name mispronounced, but then my reaction is to rescue, as opposed to sort of allowing it to happen and being like, yeah, that would be great if you sort of, I don't know, tried. and then the kind of like back and forth within that.
Yes. Yeah.
I haven't fully encompassed every part of the conversation, but that's the themes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Does anybody else from Iman's group want to add any thoughts or reflections or add to anything she said?
One of the examples we talked about was, I mean, I think in a way we ended up talking about what anti-oppressive supervision looked like, but I think I can reframe it a bit. I was kind of talking about supervisees. If I'm recommending that they name difference in the room with their clients, they sometimes tell me it's too early on. I want to build a bit more rapport first. And then if they leave it too long, they're telling me it's gone too long, it's too awkward now, this kind of thing. So I suppose if I was colluding with that, I would see that as oppressive.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You're right, because there's something about, there's a real irony in supervisors going, well, we have to build a rapport first, but actually the rapport is going to be influenced, and whether there is going to be any rapport or not, it's going to be influenced by identity.
Right.
Yeah. So yes, yeah. So there's something in that actually, which is about the oppressive part within that then might actually be a supervisee's defensiveness to want to name a difference, or to name the diversity of and the difference between two identities. That actually the counsellor themselves is refusing to work within diversity.
It's a bit, can be that sort of white fragility, or you know, kind of just avoiding that, and this sort of misguided but well-intentioned idea that if I don't see colour, I'm doing something really great then, which is understandable but ultimately unhelpful.
And I would actually push that even further, that actually the phrase "if I don't see colour" actually is an oppressive
definitely
term. It's an oppressive function in and of itself, because that actually removes the identity of the other person. To say I don't see colour, say I don't see you.
Yes.
And actually the whole point of the work is to be able to sit with and see that person and their lived experiences. So yes, if supervisors are saying that, there's a little bit more groundwork to be done first. So it's a bit more there that you need to support them in thinking about. But you're right. Yes. Anything else from that group in particular that they want to add or mention? And then we'll hear from the other group. Okay, shall we hear from the other group then? That was Emily and Emma, and whoever would like to share first. Emma. Oh, I can't hear you, Emma. Can anybody else?
No, I can't.
No. You're unmuted, but I'm wondering whether it's because you're on a headset, aren't you? Oh, there we go. Yes.
Oh, great. Good. Well, I mentioned another food metaphor. Supervisor as vending machine.
Say more. Oh, I love metaphors.
Well, it's almost like if there's a spectrum, the supervisee, because they pay, they have the right to demand that they get an answer from you on all of these 20 clients that they want to talk about today, and they'll write it down, and there's no relationship because they're not really here to be a person. You're not really here to be a person, but they've got this list of people that they have to go through because for whatever reason, that's how they think supervision works best. And they put their money in, and then I have to give them output.
Yes.
And that feels really oppressive and inhuman and mechanistic and transactional, and
yes,
can be hard to talk about as well.
Yes. Oh, I love that metaphor. It's another one I'm pinching from today's session, definitely. And actually, that was the other word that I was thinking of as you were describing that, transactional. That's exactly what it is. It's transactional and not relational. And so what gets missed then is actually what is going on between us in the supervision relationship, and any space to talk about the fact that actually what's going on here, because it is transactional. That in and of itself needs to be explored, because why is that the particular nature or dynamic of the relationship? How has it come to be in which it's a vending machine? And almost in a way the supervisee is excluding themselves from the process. It's about, I come with these client issues, supervisor, you're going to give me responses and answers to these issues, and somehow the supervisee becomes just the middle person, the messenger between client and supervisor. So entirely eliminating them from any relational dynamic or what's actually going on in the process.
Thank you. And then Emily had a really good thought.
I think we were talking a lot about how oppression can, the same mechanism of oppression can work on from both sides. So we were exploring things like gatekeeping and how that can be experienced as oppressive for the supervisor or for the supervisee, depending on how it's used. And the same with things like competency. So the expectations that the supervisee comes with can be oppressive for the supervisor. But likewise, if the supervisor plays into that idea of being the competent, knowledgeable authority, they are acting with power over the supervisee. So I think a lot of our discussions was around actually the dual nature of lots of elements of the supervision relationship, and how without them being openly expressed and acknowledged, any one of those can be used by either party to oppress.
Yes, and I love the fact that you've been able to recognise that the oppression is just not one way. It isn't just about
that was Emma. I have to say that was Emma. It was when she talked about the vending machine, and I hadn't thought of it coming particularly from the side of the supervisee as being the oppressor. My immediate thought was the supervisor, and I think as soon as she kind of gave that analogy, then that's when we started to think about it.
Yes. And equally, I love, absolutely, and I love that, so we're really recognising that oppression can happen either way. And also, of course, the second thought is gone, but something around, that was it, gatekeeping. You mentioned the word gatekeeping, and that's definitely a word that's on my slide that we're going to think about in a minute. But could you say more about, because that might be a term that other people in the group may not have come across before, or may have heard of it, but it can be applied in different situations. So when you say it can act as gatekeeping, can you give an example? In what way are you thinking? Supervise or
sorry, Myra.
Go on.
I suppose thinking about it in terms of trainees in particular, and one of the examples we were thinking about between us was around being in placement, and actually the role that the supervisor has in terms of allowing the supervisee into the profession. And that, of course, you're thinking about my supervision training, that, you know, it's very much, that's an important element, it has a protective function, but of course it also is power, you know, and it's one of the things that I have personally felt very uncomfortable about when I think about stepping into the role of being a supervisor. It's the sense of responsibility that I struggle with, and one of the things that has perhaps prevented me stepping into it sooner. So I suppose, yeah, that was, when we think of gatekeeper, that was kind of the element we were thinking of.
Absolutely. So to reiterate that it's about the supervisor because they hold a level, they hold a power, they hold a responsibility, that gatekeeping responsibility of, especially as you said, Emily, they hold a position of whether they literally allow a supervisee to be working with clients or not. And I think there are a couple of more ways that we'll go through on the slide of other ways in which they can also gatekeep. But absolutely, I think that is a key word to remember, though, which is, as a supervisor, if we are not aware of it, that we hold this gatekeeping position or function, we can really, without realizing, again, maybe unconsciously and intentionally, we can be stopping, preventing, or blocking or shutting down our supervisee in their practice or in their development. And one way specifically, and especially with trainees, is we just say, no, they're not ready to practice. Or you've got one client, you're really, it's an example, and actually that's quite a heavy client. I know the placement want you to take on a second one, but actually I don't agree with that. So we can, as supervisors, we can really take control of a supervisee, a trainee counsellor's development, progression, growth, exposure. Yeah. So really good examples there. Any others from anybody, from any group, that they want to bring to this space? Anything else that anyone else thought of? Okay, should we have a look at my list again? It's like Blue Peter. It's like, here's one I prepared earlier. So, helpful if I bring up the right screen. So let me just, there was a slide just before this, but I'm going to go back to that in a moment. Okay, that's what I've just forwarded through. So on that one side were the questions I asked. This is the list that I had as examples of how it might show up. So things such as, so absolutely holding in mind that when we're thinking about oppressive supervision, it is about the ability for the supervisor to hold power over. Whilst I also am acknowledging a supervisee can also hold power over the supervisor or the supervision process. But these are all ways in which a supervisor can hold power over. So it very simply can be just telling the supervisee what to do. If we recognise that if like going back to that vending machine metaphor that Emma has beautifully introduced to us, we hold a position in which we go, well, if you're coming with this particular issue, I can then exactly tell you what to do, almost verbatim. And I, as the supervisor, then is controlling the agenda and controlling the actual process and relationship in the therapeutic space. So being mindful that we can take a very authoritative position of telling the supervisee what to do. Equally, not allowing supervisees to bring all of themselves into the supervision space. Interestingly, I think this kind of I'm thinking about the flip side of this is what Cheryl mentioned, in which the supervisee themselves doesn't want to acknowledge parts of themselves, but also as the supervisor. So that's the supervisee being oppressive in supervision. No, it's just about my clients. It's not about me. In the same way, a supervisor can also support that as well. A supervisor can be like, no, just bring your clients. Or I know that you've got stuff going on, but that's irrelevant. And you go, no, hold on a minute. What is going on for the supervisee in that moment in their life right now is going to impact how they show up in the supervision and therapeutic relationships. So also as supervisors, we have got to be open to bringing this, sorry, let's say that again. We have to support the supervisee to bring all of themselves into the supervision space. The person we have in front of us is not just the counsellor. They are also bringing with them what is going on in their lives at the moment, because that will be impacting and influencing their capacity, their emotional availability, whether they can hold all their clients or not, whether they need to potentially stop working temporarily, they need to cut down on clients. So the idea that we only want to think of them as a counsellor is actually ignoring the rest of who they are in their identity. Equally, another way, and this, I think this is starting to lead into the gatekeeping that Emily, you named, it can show up as telling supervisees to work with a client that they don't feel competent to work with. That can equally go the other way, which is telling supervisees they can't work with certain clients, but from a place of, I don't think you can, rather than, I think you can grow into it. This is about shutting down. So, sorry, let me say that again. It's one way or the other. This is either pushing the client too quickly, so telling a client, no, you can work with these clients, telling a counsellor that you can work with these clients, and the counsellor actually isn't ready to do that. Or it can be the opposite, in which we're holding supervisees back. So we might either be pushing them too quickly or holding them back and they're going too slowly. So it can work either way around. But again, because the supervisor holds this level of authority, supervisees, particularly trainee supervisees and newly qualified, they're going to be hugely influenced by what their how their supervisor assesses their competency, in inverted commas here. So we have to be mindful about, are we pushing supervisees to do more work or take on more clients or work with particular issues or client groups that they're actually not ready to work with? Or are we actually holding them back? So this is one way in which we can be gatekeepers. The next one for me is rather an interesting one. This is to say that to be oppressive is to not acknowledge that the supervisee has outgrown the supervisor. I find this particularly interesting because as supervisors, if we don't acknowledge the growth of our supervisee, and if we think we are always going to be kind of the larger container that they fit inside of, we limit the space and capacity and container that we allow that supervisee to grow into. And it's interesting because I always think of this as another metaphor for you, a shark in a tank. A shark will only grow as big as the space allows it to. So if you put a shark in a small aquarium, it will not grow to its full size, to its full potential. It will adjust its growth to the space that it's in. But you stick a shark in its natural habitat of the ocean and it will grow to its full potential. And I think we as supervisors have to recognise that we are tanks of particular sizes, and we might start off with baby sharks and they can grow to a particular size with us, but at some point they will outgrow us, i.e. they need a bigger tank or a different tank. They need a different type of supervision, or they need a supervisor who has particular experience, or a supervisor that works with a particular client group or particular modality or special interest. So it's not that we're saying that supervisees outgrow us, not necessarily with experience, but this is recognizing that supervisees can outgrow our supervision space. So I always think of that shark metaphor, that shark and shark tank metaphor for this. And actually, I'm the opposite in terms of, I kind of feel like I've done the best job I can if a supervisee outgrows me or gets to a point in which I think, actually, you now need a supervisor who can do X, Y, or Z that's not within my remit or not my specialism. So it's also encouraging the supervisee to also get into an environment, a supervision environment and space that's actually going to further nurture them. Because once they get to a point of once the supervisee gets to a place where they are fully grown in our supervision tank, after that, all they're doing is what's that word? They're not growing anymore, and plateau, that's what I'm thinking of. They plateau in their practice. They stay the same size. Connected to that then is, of course, they're not allowing the supervisees to grow. That might be, even if we get them as a baby shark, for example, it might be that we want to keep them as a baby shark. We kind of say, well, you're working, for example, you're newly qualified, you're working with 3 clients. Well, maybe you need to stay in your placement and only work with 3 clients whilst you consolidate your experience for the next 3 years. Oh no, I'm making this up clearly, but the next 3 years, oh, you want to go and do more training? No, you should wait. Oh no, you need to stay where you are. Yeah. So it's about not encouraging supervisees to take on more training, maybe, or different types of client groups or different types of client issues. And it's very much about keeping the supervisee where they are at now. The next couple of points about oppressive supervision is about the relationship itself. Preventing supervisees from finding a new supervisor. Now, interesting, I think on paper when I read this, I go, that sounds like, not that it would be, like, when would that ever happen? But I don't think it's always as obvious as, I'm going to stop you from finding a new supervisor. I think it's subtly done. It can be subtly done through a supervisor saying, well, we have at least a minimum year contract. And if at some point during that contract, a supervisee might feel that they're not getting what they want, a supervisor might very much be stuck to that contract. There might not be space to have that conversation. Or it might be more overt and actually be about, well, actually, no, you need the supervision. So I don't know. I mean, I'd be curious. We'll go back to the gallery in a moment, but I'd be really curious if any of you, once we get through this list, if any of you have ever felt any of these in your own, not you as the supervisor, but you as the supervisee, perhaps, or in group supervision when you were training. A very obvious way in which oppressive supervision shows up is pushing supervisees into positions of powerlessness, oppression, or dependency on the supervisor. This is the gatekeeping that, Emily, you were talking about. Supervisees are very powerless, especially when they're training, or in training, because they have a dependency on their supervisor. This can be for the green light, fitness to practice, green light to take on more clients, and oh, there was another one. It's completely gone out of my head. It will come back to me. Oh, that's it. A report. If supervisees in training are reliant on a supervision report, supervisees then can take up very submissive positions to be the good, in inverted commas here, the good supervisee. I'll jump through the hoops. I'll do what's expected of me. I'm not going to rock the boat. And I will then do exactly what my supervisor wants me to do because I need that report. And as we know then, supervision reports in training and in placements then hold a lot of weight in how supervisees then go on and get assessed or marked on their courses and in their training. The final 2 on the list, forcing so this is the supervisor's modality onto the supervisee and supervision process. And what I mean by this is that if as a supervisor, we might have learnt various supervision models, but if our core training, our core counselling training is in a particular modality, I'll use myself as an example of this. So my core training is psychodynamic. I think very much psychodynamically in my counselling, of course, in my own supervision, but in the supervision that I offer, I lean into psychodynamic models and reflection process. Now, if I was to take on a, I don't know, CBT supervisee, and then all of a sudden I go, well, I'm psychodynamic. You are now going to do supervision through a psychodynamic lens. What I am doing is I'm not allowing my supervisee and the supervision process then to actually nurture their modality. And why, again, this can sound really, but I've seen it happen in which supervisees lean so much into their counselling modality that they are using that as their supervision model, or their way to process in supervision. So we've just got to check for which modalities am I leaning into in supervision. There is absolutely nothing wrong with having a particular lens in supervision. I'm sure all of you have a particular models or modalities that you use in supervision that you lean into. What I would say then is, in order for it to be anti-oppressive, is make sure you match then with supervisees who want supervision in that modality, as opposed to taking on that supervisee wanting supervision with you because you are convenient, you're in the right location, the right time works for you, you're the cheapest. You know, there are lots of these external reasons why a supervisee would want supervision with you, but have nothing to do with how you actually work in supervision. So just be mindful of that. When supervisees approach you for supervision, some of these questions that we have to think about in our supervision assessment and suitability to work with somebody, be really clear then on how you offer and what modalities or models of supervision you work with, because that has to be a good match. Otherwise, we end up being oppressive. We end up forcing our modality onto them. And then finally, expecting the supervisee to take our advice and apply it in their counselling relationships. Now, of course, supervision is about giving guidance and helping supervisees to think through their clinical work. However, at the point in which it becomes oppressive is this expectation. It is us telling the counsellor, you must do X, Y, and Z, unless, caveat to this is, unless it's an ethical issue. What I'm talking here about is within ethical practice, if you're telling them to do X, Y, and Z in the counselling relationship, and you expect them to do it, then your involvement in the process is a power over. It's an oppression. It's too much of an influence on the process. As I said, the caveat to that, though, is if it's directly an ethical dilemma or issue in which the supervisee must do something, then it's not a power over, it's a power in between or a power with, because you are helping them to think and work ethically. But it's a difference to actually tell them, actually, next session, you must tell your client that they must talk about their mother, for example. Cliche, I know, but that kind of thing. Yeah, it's nothing to do with an ethical issue, but it's you are directing your supervisee to do something definite in the next session. You are creating the counselling agenda. Okay, so these are ways in which some are very obvious, some are very subtle, but these are ways in which we can, as I said, unintentionally and consciously utilize our power to make it power over our supervisees. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing, bring us back into gallery so everyone can see each other. Of course, you'll get that as a slide in your PDF on Monday. But any just immediate thoughts, reactions, questions to the list and thinking about power over oppressive supervision? Any thoughts?
I suppose thinking about the ripple of harm that it creates, with the example of the gatekeeping to the powerlessness, and how, if the supervisee doesn't feel they have any power and that they're at the mercy, if you like, of the supervisor, how they then withhold and perhaps don't bring difficulties or things they might be perceiving as flaws or concerns about their own practice, and then of course the risk of harm that is then passed down to the client.
Yeah, really good point there, Emily. Yes, I'm so acutely aware of counsellors, especially trainees or newly qualified counsellors, that show up in supervision and desperate to be the good counsellor, desperate to say, oh no, it's all okay, all okay. And you're quite right then. Everything then that they might perceive as bad, but we might perceive as actually that's the learning, that's the growing edge, gets just completely denied, avoided, ignored. And you're quite right then. Guess where it's happening then? Not in supervision, but it's happening in the counselling room instead. And then ultimately, yes, it's the client then that's on the receiving end of it. There's something, and I think that's one of the biggest red flags, or immediate red flags, obvious red flags in supervision, is that if your counsellor, your supervisee is showing up and only presenting the good. Another way of noticing that is, are they continually bringing particular clients and not others? Have you gone a long time without talking about a particular client? So I'm very mindful of which clients they bring, which ones do they not bring, which ones do they not bring for a while, because actually it's for us to go, what are they not? It's why are they not bringing it? Because what's going on over there, and they're busy distracting us over here with the work that they perceive as doing well. Yeah, really important point there. Yeah. Any other? Cheryl, please.
Yeah. Could you give some examples of warning signs? I'm really interested in this supervisees outgrowing us, which I can accept as a concept, but if I haven't noticed it many times, then I'm wondering, is it a blind spot for me? And do you have any examples of what to look out for to be alert to that?
Yeah. And I'd be curious as well, like from the group, please can other supervisors, we're all supervisors in the groups, please all join in if any examples. Two examples immediately pop into my head. So my brain. So these are examples or signs of supervisors outgrowing us. Firsthand, I've experienced. It's about monitoring as I work month on month with a supervisee. What direction are they growing in terms of, are they working within now a particular client group or theme or issue or modality, in which I'm going, our starting point, we were quite close in how we worked.
Okay, so it's like a divergence almost.
Yes, and in the very obvious example I can give is that a supervisee that I had in total, we worked together for 5 years. I would say in our first 3 years, we were very much close in terms of a close match in terms of modality, in terms of both being psychodynamic. And then naturally, in terms of their workload, they were doing more and more trauma work, to the point where that became the focus of their work. So in our final year and a half, they went and did further trauma training. They did that critical incident debriefing training. And, and it's a chicken and egg thing. The more training you do, the more you work with it, the more you specialize in it. And I noticed by the end of that year, I named it with them and said, I'm really mindful that in the 4 years we've worked together, we've gone from here to here. And so how's our supervision supporting and really helping you to grow in that direction? And am I then the best supervisor for who you are as a counsellor right now and who you want to be in the future?
So it's a bit about alignment and maybe some technical, clinical aspects rather than a generic.
Yes. So that is specifically in terms of their kind of career path or their what they're specializing in. So that's one way to monitor. Another way is, have they outgrown us because it's not necessarily that they've specialized in anything, but something about, are we noticing that the work that they're bringing, is it starting to plateau in our relationship and in our process? Have we fallen into like a comfort of they bring their clients, yes, we work with their clients, and maybe what they're no longer perhaps feeling as challenged, or perhaps they are feeling like, yes, we're doing the work, but there's no additional room for growth, because between us, I can't identify what space they want to grow into, but neither can they. And that can be a blind spot between us because of the match, because they've grown as much into their growth with me.
I think I would see that as a kind of natural plateauing in, say, mid-career.
Yes.
But maybe what you're saying is maybe we can all consider changing up our supervisor every few years, which I think is, I mean, I don't want to say subjective, but I've had the same supervisor for 10 years and I'll probably continue with her unless something terrible happens, you know, so it's about safety as well, isn't it, over something else.
Yeah, and the other thing as well, I think the third way is, I think, thinking about what's come into my head is you know, Proctor's triangle of supervision, like the 3 functions of supervision. Are people familiar with Proctor's 3 functions of supervision? Sort of, yes. So in a nutshell, Proctor's 3 functions: supportive, normative, formative. And one way in which a supervisee, well, another way a supervisee can outgrow us is what we offer in one of those 3 areas we can't give any more in. And often it's the formative stuff, which is their developmental.
How can that be never ending? Does that mean that for my supervisor, you know, I've got to be learning new stuff in supervision as a supervisee? I'm just wondering how realistic that is.
Well, how there is always space for it in any supervision, but I think what I'm referring to in terms of how a supervisee might outgrow us is, for example, they want to develop, they want to create working in a particular way that is outside of our remit. Now, that might be, again, an example that comes into my head is because I train supervisees, so I deliver a diploma in supervision. And if a trainee supervisor is supervising a counsellor who only works on placements, that's a good match, because this trainee supervisor has also worked in placements, as we do when we're counsellors. However, this supervisee, this counsellor now has announced, I now want to set up private practice. The supervisor has never worked in private practice. So in that developmental, formative part of the triangle, the supervisee, the counsellor, is wanting to almost expand that triangle in supervision, but it's outside the remit of this particular supervisor.
Okay, so it's driven by the supervisee, even if it's outside of their awareness and by the supervisor. Right.
Yes, and so the supervisor then has to go, you want to develop in that very particular way. I don't have direct experience of it, so I'm not the best supervisor. I can still supervise you, but it won't be as good. And also, what I always want for my supervisees, to the point where they will then go and get a new supervisor, I want them to get the best supervision.
Yeah.
And so again, anti-oppressive practice is to say that supervision might not be with me then.
Yeah. Great.
Hence that point as well on that slide, saying some supervisors would keep the supervisee and go, oh, you want to go into private? Don't worry, I can still supervise you, even though the supervisor has no experience of private practice, but they can oppress and keep their supervisee with them just for the sake of saying, no, you're not going to go off and outgrow me or go and do something that's outside of me. So there are certain ways in which we can monitor. The final piece I want to speak to that as well is, again, I don't know whether people have this inbuilt into their supervision, into their contract, is like an annual review of their supervision. That's also a really good moment in your annual review to figure out how much they've grown in that year with you. Have they plateaued, or have they actually started to outgrow you? And the way in which I will ask that is, what are your current needs in supervision, and have they been met this year with me? What additional needs might you have moving forward, and can I meet them? That's a really good way, and I do it every December with all my supervisees. It's a great way to go, actually, maybe there's 1 or 2 needs now that they additionally have. I can meet them, or I can't. And if I can meet them, great. Do you want to stay with me? By all means you can. But if you want to meet those needs with somebody else, or you feel I can't meet those needs for you, then we'll have to think through our ending, and you have to think about finding a new supervisor. So an annual review is a great way to monitor whether the supervisee is growing, fully grown, plateaued, or outgrown. Yeah. Anyone else have any questions or thoughts, but based on the slide, based on the conversation we're having? Any of the yeah.
Just in terms of what you've just been talking about, sometimes I've had experience of supervisees who I'm aware the tank's become too small for them.
Yes.
And they haven't necessarily wanted to change tank. But it's like, well, you said you wanted to go for certification, or you said you wanted to do this, and you're not. So what is it about this tank that's, and I sack myself occasionally sometimes. And I sacked myself from one relationship, and she flew afterwards. She's done all these things that, you know, she couldn't in our tank.
Yes.
Which is great. So there's something about that.
Yeah.
And then what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, yes, I often find a confusion. People sometimes take what happens between the supervisee and I, and they think they can replicate it with the client. And so I often have to try and somehow verbalize that obviously I wouldn't use this language with a client. I'm using it with you. Well, this is an example. I'm trying to help you with something. This isn't for the client.
Yes.
And somehow that feels relevant.
Yes.
Because I think if they're in a say beginnery mode, or they're quite young in practice, if something lands with them, they're like, oh, that's yeah. They kind of they think it's, you can take these things in different places and it will land well.
Yes.
But that's part of learning, or I don't know, something like that.
Yes. And actually that's such an important point, Emma. Thank you for sharing, because again, it's about recognizing that if we don't realize the influence of what we're saying in supervision, and recognizing that what I have just modeled to my supervisee, that they are then going to take that and replicate it, we've got to be mindful that that doesn't happen. So then we have to name that. As I said, I often use this phrase, I'm showing you my workings out. And by saying that to my supervisees, they recognize then that what I'm about to say then is not to be shared with the client. It's about helping us understand what's going on in the process. So I think it's quite right to name it and say, yes, I'm saying this to you. I would not say this to the client. I say that all the time to my supervisees. You know, I'm showing you my workings out. I'm saying this to you because it's supervision. It's not counselling, and I would not say this. I would not say it in the same way. I wouldn't phrase it in the same way to the client. I would always then also add in at the end, take this and put it into your own words. Take this and think about how you would then want to, you know, your relationship with your client. How would you phrase it to your client? And then I'd offer them perhaps the space in supervision itself to test out, almost, you know, help them formulate the sentence. But I'm always really mindful that what I say, I am modeling a process, but also I'll also be really conscious and explicit of, but I would not say this to directly to, if that's the case, I would not, if it was the case of that, you know, I would advise not to say this directly to the client. Think of your own way of saying it. And I'm sharing this with you as my workings out. Yeah. I think there's something in thinking about this also, in reflecting on it now, there's something about in supervision, it's exactly that. It is a process of figuring things out. And so the language we use, the way in which we talk about it, the way in which we make meaning of it is not the same way of making meaning of it in then the counselling itself. But the purpose of supervision is to guide us in making meaning of the making meaning process in counselling. Yeah. It's not, whilst we can often talk about parallel processes between counselling and supervision, it is not the same process. Similar, but not the same. Yeah.
I think I've had situations of that, because I think sometimes there's something to be said about almost psychoeducation of supervision, because I've had like moments where, well, one specific one that I'm thinking about where a supervisor had come and we were exploring kind of ideas in a group setting, and they had gone and tried it out with their client, but it didn't, perhaps like it wasn't used in the, like, I guess they took it away and applied the exact way it was happening in the supervision, which wasn't probably appropriate with their client. And I didn't kind of like, I guess, safeguard or like comment on what was happening or any psychoeducation of this. And then had come back and sort of said to me that it didn't work, and there was almost like a blaming. It felt like, oh, you told me to do that, but I definitely didn't. But and then having to be a bit relational and exploring what that brought up for my supervisee, and being like, okay, like it sounds like that was a really difficult, and maybe there's a part of you that is blaming like the supervision and stuff. And they did feel that way. And I guess like it's very difficult to manage situations like that, because there is like this defense that sort of comes up anyway, but also like how to, and I guess I'm answering my own question, but I guess maybe there is a question in there about kind of, maybe there is something about saying like, this is what I'm saying to you, but not necessarily what you should go out and apply to your client in this specific way.
Yes,
absolutely.
And sorry, can't carry on.
Just giving back that power that you're trusting the what's the word, the, like, you know, the therapist's own kind of like way of working, to apply it in their way, and giving them that kind of trust, if that makes sense, and that power in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this really speaks to both what you've just said, Iman, and what, Emma, you've said. This really speaks to that as supervisors in supervision, we can explicitly name what we're doing in the process, which we don't do in counselling. In supervision, we can say to our supervisees, actually, you know, let's have a think about this. Let's deconstruct it between us. Let's us make sense of it. That is to support your thinking when you go back into the session. So I will make it very explicit that what is it we're about to do? What is it we're doing right now that is actually, it's for supervision. We're not doing something for you to, as you said, Iman, it's not to replicate. Because equally, when we do that, it's out of context as well. You know, I think clients notice that. I think clients can notice that all of a sudden, it's a bit like just something comes out of left field in the session. And it's like, yeah, it's because you've taken it directly from supervision and applied it without thinking about how does it sit within the current counselling process and relationship. And again, that's part of, as a supervisor, in a way, managing that for the counsellor, for us to be explicit and say, this is for supervision, for us to figure it out in here. And then afterwards, let's think about actually what now, in what we've just discovered in supervision, how might you now apply it to counselling? Always make that bridge. Step one is let's deconstruct it in supervision. Step two then is the question to the supervisee. Okay, so based on that new awareness, what might you now do? And again, you're giving the power back over to the counsellor. What might you now do or say or think about or hold in mind in your sessions? So yeah.
I guess that's like quite scaffolding in a way, the whole supervision session.
Absolutely.
Which is useful.
Yes, yeah. I like my scaffoldings and my frameworks, clearly, but there's something about it's because I can hold it in mind, and in my session, in my supervision sessions, I'm making sure that what I'm not falling into is the trap of recreating a counselling session in here, and then without leaving the client present, and they take that and then just repeat it with their client. I'm very mindful that I'm very clear of the remits of what supervision is. It does caveat slightly with, not caveat rather, but a little tangent point with that I thought of earlier as well, which is when we start supervision with a new supervisee, make it really explicit about what the roles and responsibilities are of supervision, of supervisor, supervisee. Make it really clear in your contract what supervision is. And sometimes that's part of the psychoeducation, especially if you're working with trainees and newly qualified counsellors, because it isn't for them just to bring their client work. And the supervision is not us deconstructing your session to tell you what to do in the next one. So I think part of the responsibility of a supervisor is to make sure we don't end up kind of in that ditch, in that unintentional trap of supervision being that. Yeah. So again, it goes back to how we are setting up supervision with our supervisee from the very get-go. Yeah. So the contract, expectations, roles and responsibilities, all they're part of at the front. Again, parallel, kind of a parallel with a counselling contract, but clearly roles and responsibilities with supervision. Yeah. I'm mindful that we're coming to 1:15. I'm thinking we're better to take the break now. I said 3:15, 3:20, so look at that. So 3:15, we'll take a break. But you come back at 1/2 and then what we'll do is we've got the final hour then to focus on the model. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. As I said, I am here in case anybody needs to check in with me during the break. Okay. We'll be back at 1/2. We're starting back in a couple of minutes, so please do take your time. But just as a quick reminder. Oh, welcome back, everyone. Bang on time. There we go, 3:30. So, final hour, and what we're going to do is essentially take all the different concepts and different aspects that we've learned today about anti-oppressive practice, and we are going to put them into the model. The model essentially is created out of everything we've been talking about today. So, in thinking about the anti-oppressive supervision model, before we kind of look at the model itself, I'm going to walk you through a couple of tools, first of all, that help you then do the bits in the model, if that makes sense. So we're going to look at the tools first, so that when we come to the model, when I walk through the 9 eyes of the model, you know what to actually do in looking through that particular eye or lens. In any supervision generally, there are 2 aspects to supervision. One is we are supervising the therapeutic relationship itself, the actual clinical work of the supervisee. And for anti-oppressive supervision, within that then, it is to look specifically or additionally at identity and power. Okay, so ordinarily in supervision, we are thinking about the client material and what the supervisee is bringing. What we are doing with anti-oppressive supervision, we are additionally bringing in thinking about identity and therefore power in that work. The other part, the second part of supervision, is then thinking about what's actually going on in the supervision room itself, in the supervision process and supervision relationship. So these are kind of the 2 halves of supervision. One half, let's look at the therapeutic relationship and process with my supervisee. Second part, the other part is let's look at the supervision process. And equally, to look at the in-here supervision process and relationship, we are additionally adding in identity and power. Okay, so in both halves of supervision, we are now bringing in identity and power. And so there's a couple of tools that I'm going to screen share with you that will then help you, again, you know how much I love my structures and frameworks, just give you a framework to help you think about identity and power. Okay, so let me just screen share with you. So we're first of all going to be looking at, in the first part, when we think about as supervisors supervising the therapeutic relationship, thinking about the client work, there are 2 tools here that help us think about identity and power. So this is the identity wheel that I was speaking about earlier. This is that on that spectrum of oppression, do we end at the oppressed end or the power end of the spectrum? This wheel identify all the different identity characteristics that we each hold inside of us of what makes up our identity as a whole. And for every characteristic listed here, it may locate us on that spectrum of oppression, either at the oppressed, the powerless end, or the power end. Okay, so everything we spoke about this morning, what brings me back, what brings me privilege and advantage, and what might bring me barriers and oppressive experiences and marginalization, are all going to be related to one or a combination of these identity characteristics. The useful thing with this particular identity tool is, like everything else in counselling and supervision, it offers us the opportunity to check for ourselves that we're not missing any blind spots. Because we might get so focused on a client or supervisee's gender, for example, or ethnicity as a defining factor in their lived experience or relationship, that we might miss that actually it might have something to do with their accent or age or faith or status. So you can start to see that this allows us to start recognizing actually what's the makeup of our identity for ourselves as supervisor, for our supervisee counsellor, and for their clients. So with this tool, there is also a what I recommend then is to fill this out for yourself in order to help you get a feel for how to use it. And it's also a tool which you can give to your counsellors to help them start identifying what the identity of themselves, the supervisee themselves are, but also for their clients. And the importance, or the reason why I invite you as part of the anti-oppressive supervision model to do this is because the moment we start to understand what identities are working within diversity, what are the identities in the relationship, we can then start to identify what might be the underlying power dynamics or power hierarchies that are being brought into the therapeutic relationship and supervision relationship. So this identity will, as I said, it's a, from the PDF that you get, you can print this off as an A4 and you can fill it out. Or if you have the book, at the back of the book, there are templates of these that you can just photocopy. I've done that intentionally and deliberately so that you can actually use this as a very hands-on tool in either as a counsellor in your process notes that you take to supervision, or as a supervisor, you can have these to hand to fill out as you're doing your supervision with your counsellor. You can sit there together and fill one out for your client, for the client that's being brought to supervision, or you could fill it out for your counsellor to get them to think about what might be influencing and impacting their therapeutic relationship. So one tool that we proactively use in supervision. Once we recognise what somebody's identity is, whether our own, our supervisees, or a client that they've brought, we can then start to identify what their intersectionality is, or what experience of power, increase of power do they have, or decrease of power that they might experience because of their identity. So the second tool is, I've mentioned the spectrum, I have it in there just as a reminder of where we might land on the spectrum based on our identity. But the next tool is what we call the scales of power identity characteristic tool. This, on that scales, this is a really useful tool to help us acknowledge that based on how we fill out that identity wheel, which increase the power of that person's identity or decreases their power. And what I've got on this tool are examples of power dominant identities that increase somebody's power, and identity characteristics or categories of identity characteristics that decrease somebody's power. And as for myself, as I mentioned earlier, being ethnically minoritized, racially minoritized, being female, being visibly Muslim, I will be in that downward facing arrow that decreases my power visibly. But I have to also acknowledge that I can also fill in that upward arrow that increases my power because I am English speaking, because I am middle-aged, because I am middle class, and because I'm educated and I have an English accent. So you can start to see where my power and parts of my identity that increases my power, I also have aspects of my identity that decrease my power. And the reason why this is useful is because if I was to compare how many things I list in my what increases my power and I can see how many things decrease my power. If I was to put that side by side with maybe my supervisee or with the clients that they're bringing, we can start to get a really good picture of where the power is held amongst us, between us. Okay. And that's really useful to start to identify, is power here being utilized because somebody has power, an increase of power in a particular aspect of their identity, in that arrow facing upwards, and they are using that in the relationship, whether that's in this therapeutic relationship or in the supervision relationship between you and your supervisee. So again, we can use this as a blank tool to fill in for ourselves, for our supervisees, and for our clients. And so this is called scales of power, because this is for an individual. Where in their identity do they hold power, increase power, and where do they decrease power? The next step then is to compare it to the other people in the relationship. So on the next slide, I've put in a template for you there to fill in for yourself. And again, photocopy for your supervisees and clients. The next slide then is putting them side by side. So this then, rather than this being an individual scales of power, this is scales of relational power. So we can put client and counsellor side by side. We can start to fill in these arrows. Where does the counsellor and client equally, of course, parallel supervision, supervisor, supervisee? Where do we hold power? Where do we decrease power? This starts to help us identify why there might be power, or where there might be power in the room. And then we have to think about how might it be being used? Or are we using my power, my increased power in the room? Am I using it for power with and in between? Okay. So these for me are two functional tools, or three functional tools: the identity wheel, the scales of power, and the scales of relational power. These are three tools that I can physically have as printouts in my supervision that I can start to fill in between me, my supervisee, and the clients that they're bringing. Because what I'm wanting to recognize is how is power being played out in here? Because ultimately, the client's lived experience that they're bringing, the very thing we're trying to understand in supervision and make sense of between me and my supervisee, is the client's lived experience. And if we get to put their lived experience within this context of identity and power and oppression, it gives us that external context. We're adding back in the external context for our clients and for our counsellor and for ourselves. So these are really, I'll say quick ways, but these are very immediate ways, I should say, of you being able to address and identify identity and power, because they are the two big key concepts in working anti-oppressively. I'm just going to stop sharing for a second because I just want to bring back to the gallery. Useful tools, do you think? Ways in which to sit and think about? Yeah. And there's a reason why I introduce the tools first before we go into the model, because they are obviously key components of the model, but I don't want to, once we look at the model, then you'll see where they fit in, okay? But as I said, very often, I don't know about any of you, but my experience is when we're given tools, they're often cognitive tools. They're ways of thinking. This for me this is very hands-on, practical, printable, yeah, templates and tools. I use them physically in my sessions, okay? So as I said, because you'll get a copy of the PDF slides, you'll have them as templates to print off, have as many as you need, okay? Are also really useful for you to use also with your counsellor hat on, and for you to take to your supervision as well. Maybe something you introduce to your own supervisor. Okay, so those are very practical tools that we are going to think about then when we then look at the model. Okay, any thoughts, reflections, or questions? Yeah, please, Emma.
I'm aware of power with, power over, and power within, but I'm not aware of power between. So if you've got any references, I'd love to follow that up.
Yeah, they are defined in the book. This is the big.
Okay.
Do you know what? This is the biggest advantage I have now, having written a book more than anything, is it's in the book. So in the literal chapter on power,
Great.
in the book, it will be in there, and I will get chapter 8, power and privilege.
Brilliant.
And it will define what those 4 types of power are. She says, unless, ignore me, I've put them in the actual component chapter on power, so that will be chapter 14.
Thank you.
And the reference for that then is it's a book on power by Gillian Proctor.
Yep.
Yes,
Great.
it's her work. She talks about the different types of power. So essentially what we're doing is we are finding these are very, as I said, immediate ways in which to identify identity and power in our identities and how they might show up in the relationship. Okay. So what we're then going to look at now is where does this fit into the model? Okay. So, oops, that did not. Sorry, I've lost you on my screen because I minimized it. There we go. There is one additional slide, well, a couple of additional slides that I've got in there as well. What I've put in really is that showing for you? Yes, is that, yeah, lovely.
Yeah.
Seeing your hands up. All I've done really is list here why the tools are useful, because they help you to actually, as I said, bring in an anti-oppressive lens into the work. Okay, I don't need to go through this list because essentially this is what we've been talking about all day. I've just summarized it into a slide for us. Okay, but essentially it's our ability to look at identity and power in the relationship and what might be impacting the process and relationship between us. So, as I said, the part 1 of supervision is looking at addressing the therapeutic relationship. And we do that by additionally looking at identity and power. And you now have 3 tools in which to do that. Looking at the other half of supervision then is a focus on the in-here process. And again, when we are now looking specifically at the supervision process and supervision relationship, in exactly the same parallel way, we are looking at identity in the in-here supervision relationship. We again are looking at power in the same way. And we are also addressing how we experience safe spaces. And we've had a discussion today about that. And our relationship to the space. So again, what we have to be mindful of when we're thinking about the in-here space as the supervisor, in the same way we think about the therapeutic relationship, in the same way that we think about the therapeutic space as the counsellor, is what is my relationship to the space? What is their relationship to the space? So in supervision, is it a space in which my supervisee feels safe? And how is my supervisee relating to the space? So this is the other half of supervision that we also need to bear in mind when we are then thinking about anti-oppressive supervision. So these are things we are adding to what we are already doing in supervision. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the model. The model then, as I've said, it adds back in external contexts, it adds back in intersectionality and identity, and ultimately it's about understanding power relational dynamics and how they play out, how we are unconsciously and intentionally playing into those power dynamics. And our ultimate aim then is to flatten the power. It is to equalize the power. As I've mentioned a few times today already, it's not about getting rid of power, it's about flattening the power, equalizing the power. Okay, the next slide is the model. Now, please don't get overwhelmed by this. I'm just going to quickly do my curtain because sun came out and went back in. There we go. So this is the model which, Cheryl, you mentioned already, and I love the fact that it was already starting to kind of leap through in a way, which is this model is an adaptation of the 7-eyed model. But what I have essentially done is added in all the lenses that were missing before. okay, that make it anti-oppressive. And of course, that is all the lenses around identity and power, okay? What you might notice, though, at the very centre of this model is like two triangles joined up. You have a supervision triangle and you have a consultation triangle. In the supervision triangle, you have client, counsellor and supervisor. In a consultation triangle, you have the counsellor, supervisor and consultant. Okay, the consultant being the supervisor of the supervisor. I call them a consultant because it's just easier than saying supervisor of the supervision of supervision. So the other thing you might notice about this model then is that the model takes into its entirety the fact that there are these two triangular relationships happening all the time. Okay, so interestingly, I think when we think about supervision, we only think of that one half of the triangle, which is client, counsellor, supervisor. This is taking on board that actually there is a three-way process in consultation as well. Okay, I'm going to walk us round the model, literally eye by eye, and we can start to see how it has subtly changed or what we've added in to make this then an anti-oppressive model. And some of this is going to look and feel very familiar to you now, as we have been talking about this all day. So our starting point is eye number one. As a supervisor, or in supervision rather, the counsellor, the supervisee, is bringing in the client's material. They are bringing in the client's lived experience. Now, what additionally we are inviting ourselves and our counsellor to consider is then how the client's lived experience is because of and shaped by their identity. And guess what I've very handily done here for you is given you a tool then to help you think about that being the identity wheel. So you can start to see how you can use that wheel very proactively with your counsellor to start to address what that client's identity is and give external context to their lived experience. Okay, so what we've done is we've taken that eye number one and gone, ordinarily we would be looking at the client's experience, but what we're adding into it then is their identity. Okay, I should say also, feel free to please jump in and ask any questions as we go through the model. Okay, if anything doesn't make sense, or if you want me to clarify it or say anything else again, please do jump in. So that's the first thing, that as a supervisor, that is often what we are thinking about in supervision. The second eye then is, oh, gone the wrong way. The second eye then is the counsellor's therapeutic interventions. So this is us thinking about, so what does the counsellor then do in response? How are they working with, what are they saying in response to what the client is bringing? What interventions are they using? And again, depending on your modality, that might be, how are they using empathy, reflections? How are they creating space for exploration? If you're leaning more towards CBT, solution focus, that might be a very literal, practical tool of an intervention. So there's no right or wrong here, but this very much is about a focus on what the counsellor's interventions are that they're using. Okay. The third eye then is, in the original model, absolutely, we're then looking at the counselling relationship. But what we are adding back into the model to make it and to ensure that it's anti-oppressive is we are looking specifically that in the therapeutic relationship, what are the two identities in that relationship and what are the power differentials? And this is where we bring in back in the identity wheel. We can fill it in for both counsellor and client, and we can use that scales of power, handouts, tools, to then think about who holds power in which aspects of their identity and how might the counsellor be experiencing that. They might start to recognise, for example, actually, I'm a female counsellor, my client is male, and actually my experience of them being male means that I immediately go into a position of submission maybe, or I retreat, or I shut down in my empathy. I don't know, I'm making up examples here, yeah? but it allows us with our supervisee to get them to think about what specifically within the relationship is creating this power differential and how is power being played out. Okay. As I said, we're adding to the I that was already there in the model, which was, let's look at the therapeutic relationship, but we're adding in additional elements to look at to make it anti-oppressive. It's always, as I said, it's always about addressing the identities and the power dynamic. So that's I number 3. Moving on to I number 4, this then is the counsellor's counter-transference and experience. Again, psychodynamically, we talk about counter-transference, maybe in person-centered, it's about immediacy, it's about empathy. Again, apply the right concept to this aspect of the counsellor. But this absolutely is about us exploring with the counsellor what was their experience in the room. And of course, these all link up. We don't look at these I's separately. We can start to think about counsellor, supervisee, your experience in the room, or that counter-transference. What was that connected to in your own identity, maybe, or how might that be born out of what the client's identity was? So you can start to merge. We don't just look at one I in turn. We look at these these are multi-layered. We look at them all together. So just as we look maybe at the counsellor's experience, that's going to be connected to identity and the power they experience or oppression they experience. And it's going to result in then their interventions and what they might reply or say back to the client. So we don't look at, as I said, we don't look at these in separation. It's like a ripple effect. One will influence the other. How the counsellor feels is going to be influenced by their identity, the client's identity, and it's going to influence then how they work with the client. So the first 4 I's are the first part of supervision, sorry. It focuses on what's going on for the counsellor in the therapeutic relationship, okay? So I's 1 to 4 on the counsellor and what they're bringing. I's 5 and 6 then are a focus on the supervision itself, the second part of supervision. And guess what? It's a parallel. I5 is a parallel to I3. We look at the 2 identities in the therapeutic relationship in the same way that we look at the 2 identities in supervision. We use the identity wheels to help us figure out what's my identity, what's my supervisee's identity, and then what might be the power differentials that are in play here. I hold power as a supervisor, but I decrease my power the moment we think about my visible identity, and vice versa for the supervisee. Where are they holding power in supervision? Okay. So it's a parallel. What we do in the supervision relationship, how we look at the supervision relationship, we look at it in the same way that we might look at the therapeutic relationship. Of course, the other aspect of supervision is our own experience. How are we experiencing the supervision? And how is that being influenced by the relationship, by identity, by power differentials? Again, how is what I'm doing and how I'm responding to my supervisee, how I'm experiencing the relationship itself, what my interventions might be, are they because of a particular oppression or power imbalance or differential in our relationship? So again, we don't just look at I5 and 6 separately. They are related. They're all connected to one another. Okay, so that then is part 2. That's the second half of what we do in supervision. Okay, this is where then the model really does get expanded into this bigger ground as a supervisor, because this is the first model to ever consider consultation. It's the first model to recognize that as supervisors, we then take our supervision to consultation. So we then move into I7, which in the consultation relationship, guess what? It's a mirror, a parallel of the supervision relationship and the therapeutic relationship. So again, we're using identity wheels and scales of power to identify who are we in this relationship, what might the power differentials be. Now, the really important aspect to this is when I's number 3, 5, and 7 are all about 2 identities in relationship, This is where we can start to think, what is being repeated? What is getting played out? Where might we be colluding with one another to hold power over a client or a counsellor? Or where might we be colluding with the third, how can I put it, as the supervisor? Am I colluding with the counsellor over the client? And are we trying to hold power together over the client? Or am I colluding with the client and we're oppressing the counsellor? Yeah, it can work both ways. And then if I was to go into my consultation with that, is it being repeated in consultation? If in my supervision I find myself colluding with the counsellor, am I coming into consultation and doing the same? Or do I mirror it? And the moment I go into consultation, do I all of a sudden collude with the person in front of me, the consultant, and we now together oppress the counsellor? Okay, so it really is about, who am I aligning myself with unintentionally, unconsciously? How am I relating to the power? Am I finding that I will collude with the person in the room? So as a supervisor, am I colluding with the counsellor because they happen to be the person that I'm in direct relationship with? So then we're excluding the client. But then the moment I go into consultation, I'm ditching the counsellor because they're not in the room. And all of a sudden, am I colluding with the consultant? So we've got to be really mindful that, because in any given relationship, the third person is not present, and we then in that moment are in a pair, we have to be really thoughtful of what is going on, that we are actually two people thinking about a third person who isn't present. So what happens to the power in the room? And who do I collude with? And when we are working anti-oppressively, it is essentially, the aim is not to collude with either. Okay. But if we're not aware of the power in these relationships, we might find ourselves colluding with somebody. And that's why I've expanded this model to include consultation. It has to include consultation as well, because whatever is going on in our supervision relationship, if it is a parallel of the therapeutic relationship, guess what? It is likely to then get repeated. We might carry that pattern into our own consultation. So all of these relationships are connected. And the one person in the middle of all of this will be the supervisor. So us as supervisors, we have to be so mindful of us being into both of these triangles. And as the counsellor, we are also part of the triangles, but we're not present in both. Does that make sense? As the supervisor, we are the only person that is consistently present in both the supervision relationship and the consultation relationship. So in both triangles, in both the supervision relationship and consultation relationship, because we are like the linchpin, because we are the one that's present in both, we have to be aware, what are we doing? Like, are we repeating oppression? Are we exerting our power over? And are we working hard to actually flatten the power, as I've said? The 8th I then in consultation is, of course, then as the consultant's counter-transference and experience. And of course, that's only applicable to those of you who might be supervising other supervisors. Okay, so if any of you already or will in the future supervise other supervisors, be a consultant, as I am, then I also then need to be mindful of this model, because I need to be aware of what's going on in my consultation relationships. I need to be aware of what's my counter-transference experience. Am I being pulled in to collude with my supervisor? Am I being pulled in to perhaps oppress my supervisor and take up a very allied position with the counsellor, maybe? So you can start to see how power can, in a way, infest the relationships. It can get transmitted from the therapeutic relationship into the supervision relationship and then into the consultation relationship. Because these are not completely separate processes. one feeds into the other, and the other way round as well. So it can feed up from therapeutic into supervision, into consultation. It can also filter back down as well. As a consultant, if I'm not aware of my power, I can be really oppressive of my supervisor, who then goes into their supervision and oppresses the counsellor. And the counsellor then goes into the therapeutic relationship and oppresses the client. So we've got to be mindful of how power can go up these relationships and get manifest, and also can feed back down as well. So we hold really influential positions here as supervisors, as counsellors, and as consultants to work to flatten the power. And I think it was Emily, you said right towards the start of today, we've got to be so mindful of that, because ultimately the person that kind of will end up getting it will be the client. It will end up getting filtered back to the client. So no matter which position we're in, whether we have a counsellor's hat on, supervisor's hat on, or consultant's hat on, we have to be so aware of how is power being negotiated in my immediate relationship here, in my supervision relationship, or in my consultation relationship, because that's how it might get unconsciously negotiated in my therapeutic relationship. The final I then, of course, is the wider external context and systems. Again, none of this exists in a vacuum. All of this is taking place in that external systemic and structural oppression. So that's why identity wheels and scales of power tools are so helpful to bring in that wider external context, help us to figure out where and why we might be holding power in different ways, or where we might take up positions of minoritization. Okay. I'm really mindful as well that I was very intentional of introducing the model as the final piece, because it's taken the day to identify all the other key pieces that feed into this model. Okay. Hopefully this has given you an understanding of how we actually do it then in the room with our supervisees, because the tools are a way to do that. And as a supervisor then, what we're doing essentially is keeping in mind, we don't have to worry so much about I7 and 8 in supervision itself. We can think about that when we go for our supervision, our consultation. But in the room, we are absolutely thinking about those two parts. First part, the therapeutic relationship, I's 1 through to 4. And then in the in-here supervision, the supervision relationship, I's 5 and 6. And all of that then being housed within I9, which is the wider external context. It can feel like there is a lot here to juggle, but hopefully this model will offer you again opportunity to kind of give you a framework and a structure to then move between these different lenses, these different eyes. We're not, I'm not expecting you to go, right, I'm going to do all of them all at the same time. It's impossible. But really, it gives us a structure and a framework to check, oh, have I missed one out? Am I perhaps not paying as much attention to one of them? Okay. And especially when we're looking at relationships and the power differentials, the identity wheel and scales of power help us to perhaps structure that in a way so that we can kind of capture it rather than having to hold it up here in our heads, like get it on paper. That way then it's a good tool then to sit and think about it and talk it through then with your supervisees. Okay. What I want to do is just give you a couple of minutes just to jot down notes, thoughts, reflections, questions, and then we'll come back into gallery, and then we'll spend the remainder of until 4:30 then kind of sitting and thinking about this together. Okay, I'll leave the slide up so that you can then make your notes and reflections and any questions you might have. And again, I'm mindful about what I said earlier about being self-compassionate. I'm sure all of you are already thinking about the vast majority of this model already. It's about adding in ways to ensure then that you're directly, intentionally, explicitly acknowledging power and identity. in order to be anti-oppressive in your practice? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and bring us back into gallery. I see people's heads are up, perhaps looking at the slide. Just sitting with it, having a think about what has that done perhaps to your supervision practice. I'm curious about then, how is this changed, pivoted, influenced, thrown maybe a bombshell on your supervision practice, or just in what ways does this sit with your current ways of thinking about supervision? As I said, I'm sure majority of this you are already doing. Perhaps most of it you are already doing. Yeah, Emma, please.
I think I mentioned at the beginning some curiosity around some relationships where I was feeling oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
And just seeing that model and you talking us through that, I kind of feel like I've done a bit of self-supervision almost.
Mm-hmm.
And now I can see or have words for what might have been happening.
Yes.
In terms of power and powerlessness, and maybe polarizing between power and powerlessness.
Yes.
And that feels good.
Mm.
And good's not the right word, but it just feels
clarity.
It just feels, yeah, clarity, and it feels practical. And I'm not saying I would probably even use these tools necessarily, you know, introduce them into this particular relationship I'm thinking of, not right now anyway. But I guess I feel tooled up,
yes,
in being able to initiate some sort of conversation,
yes,
in a different way.
Yeah. There's something about the tools can be used conceptually in your head to then talk about it dialogically with people, or they can be used very practically. And you're quite right, they don't have to be used as Myira said, I must spell it out. It's not that. It can be as a reference point in our minds, because I don't always have them physically to fill out, but I will absolutely hold that identity wheel in my head, or that spectrum, or those, there's the scales in my head to go, oh, I feel like I've just been nudged off my scales, or I've just been pushed back or pushed down. Maybe I can feel the power dynamic shifting. Yeah.
Thank you.
How about for anybody else, just thoughts, reflections, how you're sitting with the model or with the tools? Does it feel applicable? Like, does it feel like it's something you can work with and use? Cheryl, please.
Yeah, I wanted to say two or three things. I'll try and keep it brief because I'm aware of time. I think the main learning for me is the different forms of power, which I've been kind of talking to people about, but it's just given me a real clarity of vocabulary to be able to explain that more efficiently. And then some kind of reflection for me about, I'm okay with the inbuilt obsolescence of me as a therapist, but I'm kind of wondering whether I need to think about that at times inbuilt obsolescence of me as a supervisor. So that's my kind of learning edge, I think, for today, for me to reflect on in cases. And then maybe a bit of a, I don't know if you are taking questions, but it doesn't have to be answered. Maybe.
No, please ask, please. Yeah.
I'd say my supervisor of supervision has a good intuitive understanding of anti-oppressive practice, but, you know, probably not at this level of really kind of thinking about the hows and whys and joining the dots. And, you know, can I be the best anti-oppressive supervisor I could be without changing supervisor? I can imagine you really want to get this message across to supervisors of supervisors. And so I'm kind of wondering about that.
Yeah. It's an interesting one, because when there's this kind of almost like, not quite joke, like almost like my own meme in my head, that when I first entered counselling and thought, oh, I have to go to a supervisor, and a supervisor has to go to there. And I remember we had this joke running in our course going, so who sits at the very top? And this idea that there's this one person that everyone ultimately ends up being supervised by. But of course, it's not that. It's circular, isn't it? It's not a hierarchy up, it's circular. And so for me, it's any supervisor that learns this model, I know it will ripple into consultation, because supervisors are also consultants. So in answer to your question, there's something about, I'm thinking about the idea that we might outgrow then our consultants, but also because this is so new, there's also something about we can also be the growing edge, the new learning edge for our consultants as well.
And you said that, didn't you? You said you can pass some of this on to your own supervisors.
Oh, absolutely. Take those templates and take this model in and go, here, look, this is actually the type of supervision I'm wanting. This is the kind of consultation I'm wanting. I want us to address identity and power, and to think about this in my supervision with my counsellor, but also with you, consultant. I want us to think about it in here. So yeah, you become the growing edge of your own supervision. Yeah. Anyone else's thoughts then on the model? I appreciate kind of the model, as I said, it's a construction throughout the day. Kind of we've ended up with this model. So any thoughts on whether it's the model itself, its application, where it might fit in with your current supervision understanding or practice? Or maybe it doesn't. I'm open to, no, Myra, it doesn't fit.
No, I think it's really useful, and I'm sitting here and I'm feeling quite reflective about my own supervision. I have kind of my client work, you know, as a counsellor, but also my own personal counselling.
Yes.
So my experience as a client in my counselling relationship, and thinking about all the different power dynamics and how they play out. And I think something that was really useful was one of the last points you made when you were talking through the model, which was thinking about that chain of power and how it can be passed kind of upwards and downwards.
Yes.
And it's really made me kind of sit here and start to reflect on where I sit at different points in that chain and what influence I might be having.
Yes. Oh, that's so powerful, Emily. Thank you for sharing that. And I absolutely, there's something about, and again, it works both ways. To what degree am I influencing the chain? To what degree am I being influenced by the chain? And I think, gosh, we have to be so open to recognizing that we can get pulled into something, that we can be influenced by other people's oppressive natures, or their need to have power over us. What then do we do with that? Yeah. Does it unintentionally then affect what we then take back into our next relationship? Yeah. And vice versa. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's something very much about what we're really recognizing is not only where our starting point was today in terms of counselling doesn't exist in a vacuum. Even within counselling, these relationships don't exist in a vacuum as well. They're all connected. They're all part of this chain. Our therapeutic relationships are influenced by the supervision relationship, which is influenced by the consultation relationship. And so, and again, like up the chain and down the chain. And so this idea that what was that word that shall we use this more, the sacrosanct space of counselling, we've kind of gone, it isn't, is it really, now that we've looked at this through this model? It's part of a relationship exchange through these kind of triangles. Yeah. Gives it, as I said, it gives it this wider context that our therapeutic relationships are not just because of the two people in the room, but not just because of the two people in the room. It sits within this wider context of social settings, external context, but also sits inside of supervision, which sits inside of consultation. Yeah. And external at the biggest, something of the like Russian dolls, external being the biggest doll. Yeah. Any other thoughts or reflections on the model or what we've covered this afternoon in the tools, or how we might be applying this or thinking about it rather, or it could be about applying it rather in supervision, or thinking about it in supervision? Myria.
Okay, hi. I have a plan already, Myra, and what I would like to do, I mean, the model is really to present the model as a supervisee. In my next clinical supervision, I will try to present and use this model with my supervisor and see where it takes us, basically, because it's something extremely new. And then after that, perhaps in my role as a supervisor, you know, I'll be able to apply it. But what it certainly did for me, though, is a clarity on power dynamics, this model, yeah. And also the identity, which is something completely new, as introducing as another eye to the model. I was using the model before, but it's just, yeah, these elements, really.
Yes.
And it makes perfect sense of being anti-oppressive, really.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Maria, because the very elements that were missing from the original 7-9 model are the very things that when we add back in make it anti-oppressive. So the original 7-9 model, then, because it misses identity, because it misses looking at power dynamics, therefore is an oppressive model. Because it excludes it, because it ignores it and denies it. And if we go back to what oppression is, it ignores and denies systematic oppression. You know, the very nature of it means that if we're not looking at it, it means that whatever practice we're doing, if it does not acknowledge structural and systemic inequality and the role of identity in that and the role of power in that, whatever practice we're doing of whatever modality, so this is kind of non-modality specific, non-supervision model specific, whatever practice we're doing, if it doesn't include that, it is by default oppressive. Yeah. Really highlights this point again, this key word from today, intentionality. We're intentionally adding back in and bringing back into our relationships and into our processes, into our practice, then identity, or starting with external context, structural and systemic inequality, within that the role of identity, the influence and impact of power and oppression. I'm mindful we have like 8 minutes left of today. What I want to do then is give all of you an opportunity then just to take some time for yourselves in the next few minutes and just be able to sit with everything we've kind of thought about and reflected on today, and identify then 1, 2, 3 things that you're going to take from today. Now, I appreciate it might be I'm taking the model, it might be I'm taking one specific thing, Myra, that you said, whatever it might be. What are up to 3 things that you're going to take from today? Okay, so give yourselves that moment. I will screen share that as a visual for you, because I know I like to often see the question. There we go. What 3 gems am I taking away from today? And that can be from anything from today. The model, an aspect from the model, a concept, a penny dropping moment, a thought you had in the day, whatever it is that you think, this is what I really want to capture. Don't want to lose this. whatever it might be. And you might also, if you haven't already, maybe identify any kind of action points that you want to do after today's workshop as well, after today's training. Is that look up a particular reference, research something specifically, take this to your own supervision or into, or start applying it in your own supervision, whatever it is that you're thinking, these are my next steps with this. A chance to also capture that for yourselves. Otherwise, if you're anything like me, I go to lots of training and then I walk away and go, and it lives on a shelf, or I don't know what to do with it next. So give yourselves a chance to think about what I'm actually going to do. Okay, I've spent a day with Myra and a lovely group of people thinking about this stuff, but now what? What am I going to do next with it? Okay, see people's heads pop back up. I'll stop sharing and come back to gallery. Got 4 or so minutes left of today to do maybe a little bit of a checkout. Perhaps if people want to just, if people want to check out with maybe one of their gems, if they want to, or a word or something to kind of just where they're at the end of today. And if they want to share a gem, please do. But where are people at? We've got to the end of the day, thinking about fairly heavy material and cake. Don't forget the cake. But just, yeah, where are people at with it? What are they left with? And if they'd like to share a gem, please, you're also very welcome to do so as well.
I'd like to begin with thank you for today. It's been really useful. I think I've been left with a lot of reflections, and maybe need to go away and sort of consolidate, let it sink in about the different ways that it's sort of come up. I think like I can identify lots of areas that maybe need more thinking about, and maybe one of the ways that I might do that is by taking it to my own supervision as a place to begin exploring some of the concepts, because I guess I've already touched on it with my supervisor around, we've had like a dialogue around what if, you know, one of us say something that, you know, can be oppressive or offending or whatever, and how to work with that. So maybe it can be an add-on to that, and then as a result, maybe the confidence in which I can start utilizing it in my own supervision with my supervisees.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for today, and
Thank
lovely
you.
meeting everyone.
Thank you, Aman. Thank you for coming and sharing and being part of the space today. Who would like to go next? Emma, please.
I'm taking away cake, swimming pool, chains of relationships, particularly. I'm going to have to sit with the model a bit, I think, to take that in. And I too, I think I'm going to take it to my one of my consultants, to try and take it into relationships, so I can take it into relationships.
Yes.
And yes, thank you so much for today. Thank you, everybody. It's just been, yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Emma. Thank you for being part of the space and group today as well. Cheryl.
Yeah, I found it really useful. Great to meet everyone. It's removed any doubt. You know, I used to sometimes doubt myself that my fascination with cross-cultural aspects, maybe it was something to do with me and my translation experiences, or living abroad, or living in a multicultural city, and it was just my agenda to keep going to that with supervisees and clients. But this has really kind of reassured me that it is not just clinically relevant, but actually an important part of ethical practice.
Yeah, it's an essential part, really, of ethical practice. So you're right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, and thank you for being part of the group today and being in the space with us. Thank you, Cheryl. Who'd like to go next?
Yeah, I will, if you like. So I think one of the things I really liked thinking about today was the 4 different types of power. I think that's really stuck with me, and thinking about, you know, that power isn't wholly something that's negative and doesn't have to be detrimental or problematic, that actually it can be really useful, really important. And yeah, I feel empowered by that. So it's been great. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you for being part of the space and the group today. Myira, would you like to?
I was thinking the gem I'm taking, I mean, it's just one word, is that intentionality. And that goes hands in hand with self-awareness, obviously, for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, great.
And I'm also thinking of the work, the 5-component anti-oppressive model you presented to us. And when I'm confident enough, I would like to share it with my team as well. The team I work with, yes.
Yeah.
So,
please.
yeah.
Yeah.
After I'm sort of, I need some time myself, like everybody else, to reflect and sort of read more about it. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thank you, Myira. Thank you for being part of the space in the group today. I think what I'm really sat with, first of all, thank you to all of you for being part of the group in the space day. Thank you for contributing and for sharing and for being open and inviting this process and this material in, and allowing yourselves to really sit and think about it all together and being respectful of it as well. So I'm really appreciative of that. And I think what I'm really sat with is these are big concepts, and it's not a simple add-on, because if it was, we'd already be doing it. But of course, ultimately, what we're thinking about is relational processes. And I think what's been really highlighted in all of your checkouts and throughout the day is we're only going to know what it actually is going to feel and look like once we do it. And so many of you have said, I'm going to take this into my own supervision or consultation now. And absolutely, we're not going to know what it feels to be doing this work until we start doing it in relationship. And so I really encourage you to do this and support you in how you want to be using it, which aspects of it you want to pick up or drop, or which bits you've really resonated with. If anything from today has supported or helped you, then I've done my job. I don't expect people to take it on wholeheartedly. If you do, then wonderful. but actually it's about supporting you in the way that you want to grow and develop as practitioners. So if anything has supported you in your growth today, then I am thankful and I feel blessed to be able to be part of your growth and journey in this profession. As I've mentioned then, just in terms of practicalities, on Monday I will send out link to the video, your CPD certificates, and the slides as well. Okay, so you'll get all of that from me on Monday. I hope that I get the chance to kind of cross paths with you at another point, maybe an online space or an in-person space, and another training perhaps. All of my trainings and events are always listed on my website, as well as on my social media. But of course, social media is just random if you happen to see it, but everything is always on my website. I also do a monthly newsletter. If you're not already subscribed to be doing that, you can join up. There's a contact form on my website to sign up to my mailing list, to my monthly newsletter. So you then get to hear what I'm up to and any further developments if you're interested in the workshops and trainings that I offer. Just to say finally, yeah, thank you so much for joining me. Emma, did you hand your hand up? Yes, please.
Yes, this may not be a good time to ask, but
please,
I would quite like to let people know on social media if you're going to do more of these, this particular workshop. And
yes.
I'd really like a photo for social media, but I'm aware that people might need time to think about that, or photograph the screen so that we can.
I probably would have needed a bit longer.
I'm rather not personally being a photo, only because
enough.
I'm being harassed on social media and I'm trying to keep any actual personal visual off it completely.
Fair enough. Okay,
fine.
no, it's just an idea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, that's fine. What you, if you want to, of course, I appreciate that some people might want to share that they've been to this training on social media. If you want to, what I can do is, if you want to stay on the call afterwards, I can put up the slide, the home slide of the PowerPoint, and if you want to screen grab that and use that for your socials, then that's absolutely fine. But we can do that if after people have left. If you want to stay on and grab that photo, then by all means. Okay, lovely. As I said, thank you all so much. Yes, I would appreciate, yes, if you happen to be on social media and you want to share it, again, invitational, it would be lovely. Please tag me and I will of course share your posts as well if you want to. Equally, if that's not your thing and you don't want to do that, I also really respect that. Oh, that just reminded me, feedback form. I'll also be sending you a feedback form on Monday to go along with everything else. Okay, I really appreciate when people give me feedback. It just means then that I can make sure that this training is relevant, up to date and suitable and accessible for everybody. And it really helps them, for people to really get what they need from the training. Okay. Thank you all so much, and I will be emailing you all on Monday. Okay, enjoy the rest of your weekend, preferably with cake.
Bye everyone.
I'll stay.
Thank
Bye.
you.
I'm staying on the call for Emma. Yeah,
Bye.
you want to do a
Thank
screen
you.
grab. Yeah. Bye, Cheryl. So I will screen share. Cheryl, did you want to grab a photo as well, or are you? Oh, you're muted, but do you want to stay on and grab a screen share of? I will.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yes.
Thought I would.
Yeah, give me 1 second just to, oh, it's not letting me do it. There we go. Let me get back to, right, I'm gonna have to scroll all the way back. Sorry, exclude. Don't look at the screen, it might give you might trigger. There we go. Right. What I will do is,
yeah, because I didn't want to do like a spoiler and then people don't come to your training, so this is perfect.
Yes, and I will also do one as well, actually, just for my benefit.
And it is that print screen? Is that what I do?
Yeah, if you want a Windows.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's 3 buttons you have to press to screen grab. It's
okay.
On the bottom of your keyboard. Is there an FN button next to the Windows button? Hold down both of those, and then thirdly,
so I don't get photographed.
Oh, Cheryl, yeah.
Bye.
Bye, Cheryl. Lovely to meet you. Yes, the FN button and the Windows button.
Yeah.
Press those 2 at the same time as the print screen button. So you're pressing all 3 buttons at the same time.
Okay. Oh, and then I've got 4 things come up. Rectangular mode, freeform.
Oh, I don't know what that is. Oh, do you know what, Emma? Actually, I've just screen grabbed it. Do you want me to email it to you?
I'd love that. Yes, if
It will
that would be
have
really
exclusively
nice.
our two photos, you know, us
Oh,
two on it.
awesome. Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm going to grab just, oh, what have I done? I've now pressed a button, haven't I? Let me just do that one more time. We'll do smiles. There we go. Lovely. Yes. I've done a couple myself. I will email that over to you. Then you've got something. Yes. And if you're going to share it on socials this weekend, thank you so much. That's really, for people to share it. It's just, I'm really honoured that people share the training and tell other people.
Yes. And it was lovely that there were so few of us. I particularly appreciate smaller groups. So it was just lovely. Thank you.
I'm intentional to keep them small.
Yeah,
I don't do this for the masses. It's about groups that get what they need, and smaller groups are always. So yeah, intentionally so.
I really appreciate your teaching style as well. So I will
be
watching the recording, learning about how to teach better or begin to hold groups better as well. So
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Emma. It's lovely to. I know we're connected on LinkedIn, aren't we? But I really do appreciate that you've taken the time to come to the training today, and I'm glad you got something from it.
I did. Thank you.
All right, then I'm sure we will cross paths soon, but I will email you with this now and everything else on Monday. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Okay then. Bye. Stop recording.